Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Janome Skyline S7. In this video, I'm going to talk about the settings. So you can set your machine so that it does the kind of sewing that's most convenient for you. So over here we have the settings button right there. You have three little tabs up here. Right now we're in the common settings. Here's the ordinary sewing setting, and here it, of course, is the language. Now if your native language is not English, you can set it to a different language. So we're going to start here with common settings. For this, the screen contrast. Now you can make your screen brighter or darker. So say you're sewing in a room that's got a lot of bright sunlight, you may want to have your screen a little bit brighter. On the other hand, say you're sewing at nighttime, you may want to have that a little bit lower like that. And then your volume of the beep, if it's not quite loud enough, you can make it a little bit louder. If, on the other hand, you're sewing, again, at nighttime, so my favorite sewing times are at nighttime when everybody else is sleeping, you may want to have that a little bit softer. And then here we have inch and millimeter. I prefer inch. I'm going to leave it like that. And then going to the next page, there's 4 pages in the common settings. Page ahead like this. This is the standby timer. So let's say, for instance, you need to get up and go get a cup of coffee or let the dog out or take care of the kids or whatever, and you get up and you forget to come back and you come back the next day. Well, you want to have your standby timer so that it will turn off the machine. It'll turn the lights off, and you would just touch the screen to get it going again. But the standby timer is really nice. Now, you can set it from 30 minutes all the way down to 1 minute if you want. I kind of prefer the 30 minutes because that gives me a chance to go over to the ironing board, do a bunch of ironing, and come back, and the machine's still on. So let's leave the standby timer there at 30 minutes. Touch screen calibration. Now I'm going to get out of this for now. First of all, I want to tell you, you need to push OK if you've made some settings changes, because that will save those settings. So touch screen calibration is about this. If your screen is out of calibration, so for instance, if you're going to push number 8, your zigzag with an M in the middle, and you had to push like over here or over here to get that 8 to work, that means your touch screen is out of calibration. So I'm going to show you how to fix that yourself. So touch screen calibration, push yes, and then you simply take in your stylus, press right in the middle of those little X's, right there, and then there's one down here that's at the bottom of this middle, right there, and then it's done. So that's how you get into the touch screen calibration, and I did it even though it didn't need to have it done, but I just wanted to show you how it works. And then format, this means it erases what you have in the memory, either in the memory of your machine, or if you have a USB stick with some information on it, plug that USB stick there and you push that and it erases it. Next page, we have the quiet mode. Now, the quiet mode has to do with your startup speed. So it'll start up a little bit slower and come up to full speed, and it also quiets the beep. So if you're sewing, again, at nighttime, quiet mode might be a nice one to have. The sewing light, these has 3 different sewing lights. I'll show you. There's one here. We turn that one off, turn it on. You can do that. You can sew with all 3 lights on or just a couple of them. What that's really useful for is if you're sewing something that has a crease down the middle and you want to sew right along that crease, it might be helpful to turn off one of those lights. And now I can see that crease better because I've turned off the left-hand light. If I do that, I want to make sure and press OK, and that saves that setting. But I want to put it back to the way it was before. And OK, there we go. All right, page 4. This is your background color. Now you can change it to pink or to yellow or to blue. Kind of depends on what your eyes prefer. I'm going to just leave it at default. Now this resets everything to default. So if you had changed anything from the factory defaults in any of these tabs, it changes it back to the factory defaults. It's a good way to kind of clear everything, start over if that's what you want to do. Now, we're going to go on to ordinary sewing settings. This is tension. Notice you don't have a tension knob up here, a wheel, that you can change the tension. This is where you would do it. And this changes the tension for all of your stitches. You can also change the thread tension for individual stitches by going to that stitch and then just changing it in that stitch. But this changes it kind of globally for all the stitches. The needle stop position is where your needle will stop either in the down position or in the up position. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So I have it right now set to the needle down, which is the default. So when you're sewing, it stops with a needle down. Okay, now I'm going to take it out of there. I'm going to go back into settings and going to go to that again and needle. Okay, so, okay. Whoops, yep, I did it right. Okay, so at this point, start sewing, and it stops with the needle up. So because I changed that in the settings. So it kind of depends on what kind of sewing you're doing. I find that in quilting, quilt piecing, I like to have the needle stop with the needle down, and in garment sewing, tend to like to have it up. But it really depends on what, you're just gonna have to try it out, what works for you. One thing that I will tell you about the needle up, needle down position is if you stop with needle down, so along, needle down, and you cut your thread with the thread cutter button, it does lift up the needle. So after you've used the thread cutter button, you don't have to do anything. I mean, it does everything. It even lifts up the foot for you. Okay, go back into ordinary sewing. Go on to the next page. Adjustable startup speed. It has both for the start-stop button and for the foot control. I tend to like my adjustable startup speed for the button to be a little slower because I want it to kind of gradually sew, gradually get started. With the foot control, I've got a little more control over that just by not pressing as hard on the pedal. So I like to have that a little bit faster there. Let's go to here, foot height for pivoting. So I'm going to talk about what that is. First of all, let's get out of settings. If you turn on this here, let me show you pivoting. I'll take the needle out of the thread for now, just so you can see when I'm sewing. Okay, with the pivot function on, it lifts up the foot, and now you can turn if you need to. This would be good for like applique or whatever. But if you have something thick, like this batting in here, you may want to change that pivot height to make it closer or further away. That's what that has to do with. So if that's not on, then we wouldn't be using that. I'm going to just go ahead and take that out of there. There we go. Okay, go back to that setting. That's the foot height for pivoting. There we go. Okay, presser foot pressure. Again, we don't have a dial up here for changing the presser foot pressure. You can do that right here in settings. You can make it less for if you're sewing a knit that doesn't have good stretch recovery. You might want to have a little bit less. I usually like to leave it right there in the middle. And then variable zigzag sensitivity. This has to do with if you're using a zigzag for thread painting, something like this here, and you want to have it narrower and wider, you can do that with a specific stitch that you're choosing in the quilting group of stitches. And instead of this being you're raising and lowering of your presser foot, it makes a wider and narrower zigzag. So the sensitivity has to do with how far you're going to need to push your knee lifter to get it to widen and narrow the stitches. Okay, let's go on to 4. Thread cut after auto lock. I tend to like this one because if I'm using an auto lock like the locking stitch or the stitch up here that includes a back stitch at the end. Once I've done that back stitch, I like to have the machine just cut the threads, lift the presser foot, and it's all done. So I'm going to leave that one on. Another favorite of mine is the favorite stitch adjustment. Now I'm going to explain what that means. So let's say we go over here to zigzag. Now for my purposes, that zigzag is a little bit too narrow and too long. So I'm going to make it a little bit longer. Actually, no, a little bit shorter. There we go. And a little bit wider. So here we have, I expand that screen, favorite stitch right here. I'm going to press that and I want to save that as a favorite stitch. And you can see that these little adjustments here are now in yellow. What that means is go to a different stitch, come back to that, and those settings are saved. If I did not have favorite stitch adjustment set as on in settings, I would not be able to have that. So I'm going to go back in here, favorite stitch, I'm going to get rid of those settings there, and now it's going to be back to default. There we go. Close that. So again, favorite stitch, go forward just to let you know if that's off. Okay, and now if I went to, there's no favorite stitch here. So to get that to show up, you need to get into settings. I'll show you again. Into settings, go to favorite stitch, turn that on and leave that on. Resume mode, that's really nice. I'm going to leave that on for now, and I'm going to show you what that's really good for. So let's say you're sewing a big quilt, and it's going to take days and days to get that done, or at least more than one day to get it done. And you've got it all set up just right for doing your piecing. I'm going to go to, there's a stitch right up here for 1/4 inch piecing. So you don't have to get everything just right with all your settings. You could do with a favorite stitch, but you may as well do that with this quilt stitch. And I'm going to show you how to get into that. So let's go here, quilting, 1/4 inch piecing. And notice it calls for the O foot. O foot is this one right here. So, got that there. I'm going to sew a little bit of a quilt seam. And then I'm going to show you how, what the resume mode does. So I've sewn this seam, a little bit of it here. Okay, get out of that there. So, if I go and turn off my machine after having sewn that stitch, and then I turn it back on, just gotta wake up here a little bit and do this little waking up exercise. Notice it gives us this screen here. Resume last mode. I say OK, and it puts it right back into that stitch that I was sewing on yesterday. So that is a really helpful thing. Now, you may not want to have that on all the time, because if you do have it on, it's always going to give you that message right there. If you push the X in that window, it will go back into straight stitching. So maybe you do want to have it on all the time. It's really up to you. But I'm going to turn that off for now, just because I'm not doing a big king-size quilt. So always remember to push OK when you have finished doing your settings. Now, one more thing I want to talk about, favorite stitch adjustment. Let's say you have adjusted a bunch of stitches and you decide you want everything back to default in those stitches, but you don't want all your settings back to default. You can just push this little garbage can icon. It'll set all your stitches back to default, and the rest of your settings will still remain set the way you want them to do. Okay, so those are the settings, and I've pretty much set this machine to my favorite stitches, my favorite settings. If this video has been helpful to you, give us a thumbs up, and if you have comments or questions, you can leave those in the area down below. We have lots of other videos for you to watch here on our Montevilla YouTube channel, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.